I've had some people freak out about this video. They're like, "What kind of cow worship is this at a church?" I'm like, "You guys are just weird. It's no cow worship, but this is an awesome video." Okay, hey, so we're in a conversation of have you ever seen a purple cow? This is also being recorded for all of our friends who aren't here and all of our team members, so that you can catch up on our value series. So grateful for all of our spring breakies who are not out partying because we don't live that fresh life, and so we're here hanging out. But we're having a conversation. So let me invite you guys. I know it's just us today, but one of the things that will really help me is your body language and response. And so head nods. You can even give me a mm-hmm if you're feeling a little bit flavorful today. Whatever it is that lets me know that we're on the same page. Sometimes I feel like I'm talking to just, you know, an ethereal space out there, and so any kind of feedback helps me know that what I'm saying is making sense, okay? So I'm inviting you into whatever kind of response you would like other than running laps and screaming and yelling. So we're having a conversation about purple cow. Most of you have heard the story, but imagine you're driving down a road and you see black and white cows on both sides of your car as you drive, and for a second it might be cool, like, wow, look at all the black and white cows, but then almost instantly you get really bored. Black and white cows aren't remarkable, they're just cows. And so imagine while you're driving, all of a sudden in the middle of the field you see a purple cow. That would be something truly remarkable, so much so you'd probably stop the car. You get out, you start taking pictures on Instagram, and then you probably try to drug or knock the cow out, tip it over, shove it in the back of your Subaru, and sell it on eBay because you would be a millionaire. And you call me afterwards so I can help you do that because I'm great at selling stuff like that. So that's the idea. A purple cow would be truly remarkable, right? You with me? We're having a conversation about what does it take to create a purple cow in Boulder. And especially as a new startup church, as we're building a team and continuing to make a difference, we're trying to make a lot of noise, and there's a lot of black and white cows. Seth Godin is a guy that wrote this book that this concept came from, and he said that you're asking the question, what would it take to create a truly remarkable version of your product? And the cool thing about the church is that we're not trying to make a product known, we're trying to make a person known. And so there's some leverage, I think, that we have that maybe in the marketing world you're not having to deal with. And so let me give you a quote. This is pretty cool. He said this in his book, Purple Cow. He said, remarkable products are often controversial and outrageous. And so what would a really controversial and outrageous version of your product look like? And so that's the conversation we're having. And what's really cool is that Jesus was often controversial and outrageous in the way that he loved, in the way that he talked about God, in the way that he engaged the society around him. And so it made all kinds of religious people mad. It made lots of non-religious people really interested in what he was talking about. And then we see his early followers kind of embrace the same idea, and they were remarkable as well. Let me give you this additional quote from his book. I thought this was really awesome. He said, when it comes to this remarkable conversation, the opposite of remarkable is actually something very good. And I was like, whoa. He said, so we're not talking about remarkable and bad. He said the opposite of a truly remarkable product is actually something just very good. And he said this, have you ever been on an airline and they get you where you wanted to go and they did it safely? Right? Probably everybody in here has done that, right? I flew this week to Vegas and back. You know what? No problems at all. Right? He said, are you going to talk about that when you get back? No, you don't go around and talk to people like, oh man, Southwest just did such a good job of getting me from point A to point B, and it was just, right, what are they? They're just a black and white cow. They did it well. They did it safely. What would make it remarkable? What would make it remarkable is either something horrible happening beyond belief, like your flight turning into a cruise, you know what I'm saying? Like, that would make it worth talking about. Or something unbelievable, such as, and this is what he wrote, he said, such as an upgrade to first class because they like your shoes. You're like, okay, I would tell somebody about that. Like, I got upgraded to first class because they liked my shoes, or they served me free champagne because it was my birthday. That'd be pretty remarkable. Or, this was awesome, they gave you free tickets to a concert because they liked your jokes. I'm like, that one would be, because I have terrible jokes, that would be awesome for me. And so the opposite of truly remarkable is actually very good. I think that's a challenge because there's lots of churches that are really good. And so we're not having a conversation about what does it mean to be a better church than the one down the street. We're asking what can City Church do that will be 10,000 times different than any other church in our city. And just to give you some perspective, 93,000 people in our city currently, actually bigger than that, that's rounding down, would not be affiliated with any kind of religious experience whatsoever. They would just say they're non-religious, maybe spiritual, but not associated with any kind of church or anything. And so if we were to just reach 1% of our city, be 1,000 people. Just to give you perspective, 1% of our city will be 1,000 people, and that would be an incredible, I mean, there's only one church in Boulder that runs over 1,000, just for the record. And so to have that kind of influence in our city would be truly remarkable. And so that's the question is, man, we can do this with other churches, and it's not a war or a game of who's better. It's just, what does it take for everybody to be their own individual purple cow, if you will? But specifically for us, we're looking at the early church. So we're in this conversation around our values. So I have a picture for you of some purple cows right here. Ready for that, Daniel? What's up, kids? Just coming on in here. Hey, sit down. No. Sit down. Sit down. Daniel, you got that for me? You can close all the doors. Hey, are you helping? Good job, man. All right, hey, so I want you guys to see that we are talking about a purple cow. I love you, buddy. Good job. 4 things that we see the early church do that we're embracing. 4 things that kind of define us as different than 10,000 other churches, okay? And 4 things, honestly, that would not be possible without you. And so our team that's not here and that you're listening online, these 4 things are not possible unless we're doing them together. And so I want you to think of them as 4 legs. Before I do that, well, sorry, go back, Daniel. Before I give you this, I got a cow joke for you because every week this is important. What do you call a sleeping cow? A bulldozer. Why? This one's really good. Why do cows have hooves instead of feet? Because they lactose. Dude, oh, so funny. Yes, what do you call a cow with no legs? Ground beef. Okay, and so we've been going through I want you to think of our 4 values as the 4 legs of our cow. Jesus was the original purple cow. Now we're having a conversation around these 4 values. So the first one was radically generous. The second one, you can go back and look at these online, relationally invested. And today we're looking at the value of consistently transparent. And so here's the definition of this value. Let me give it to you on the screen so that you have it. Here's what we mean by this. We choose, by being consistently transparent, we choose to live openly and honestly. To be transparent with our motives and our feelings. None of us are perfect, and none of us have time to pretend that we are. Our heart is to bring our best in every situation. And when we drop the ball, because we will, that's really important, because we will, we love each other enough to correct and encourage. Okay, this is our value of consistent transparency. It's married to the value of relational investment. You can't have one without the other, but this is really important because when you start to relationally invest in others, you need this value, right? Because it doesn't take long to start butting heads. And so today's conversation is probably the hardest. You can leave this up for a minute, Daniel. Probably the hardest of all of our values because everyone wants other people to be transparent with them and no one wants to be transparent with others, right? It's way easier for someone to make you mad or to have conflict and to avoid it, stew on it, even share it with someone behind their back rather than deal with it face to face because conflict takes work. And what we said last week is that when it comes to love, more is caught than taught. Love is not a feel thing, it's a do thing. It's something we have to practice in community. And because we're not great at this perfectly, we have to surround ourselves with people who we can practice loving with. Was that the flag? Oh, no, it's okay. It's down now. There it is. Our flag just fell in the parking lot, and it's probably in pieces. Woohoo. All right, so the premise of this series has been that being a Jesus follower is all about relationships. And so the first week we looked at Jesus as God pursuing us. And what's beautiful about this is that our relationship with God is touching everything else in our lives. And so love, we said last week, doesn't look for loopholes. And so we were left with this big idea last week. Imagine a city that is still maybe critical of our beliefs. Imagine a city and people around us that can still be critical of the fact that we believe that Jesus is God, that we believe that faith in Jesus is how you can have a relationship with God. Imagine a city that can still be critical of that belief, but at the same time would be envious of our love. That we look around and we have relationships and our neighbors and our friends and our coworkers would say, you know what, I might not completely agree with what they believe, but I can't argue with how legitimate their love is. It's something that I want. That's what we're inviting each other into. And so, again, love is not looking for loopholes. It's looking to engage on a really relational level. And so the world is watching, and they're asking this question. Is what we're talking about real? Is the love that we talk about real? And I would say for the most part, no. The problem is that many people have experienced churches that don't look or feel like family, right? Tracy, we were just talking about it, right? You have this religious experience that is totally separated from the love that Jesus is telling us that we should have, and even the love that Christians say that they do carry, and all of a sudden, you have this hypocritical thing, and it just doesn't match up. And part of it is, man, we're all hypocritical to a degree, so there's grace there, but then I think there's also the difference between religion and family. And so to set this conversation up, I just want to help you understand. Religion treats church like a business transaction. I'm going to show up, I'm going to put the least amount of effort in to get the most out of it. I'm going to check a couple of boxes like we were talking about. I show up on Sunday, I did my good thing, I'm good with God, and I can act and live however I want the rest of the week because me and God are good. And religion is not what Jesus came to bring. In fact, it was in the face of religion that Jesus came to initiate a conversation of God's family. Over and over again, Jesus uses family language of when we are brought into a relationship with God through faith in Jesus, we're adopted into the family of God, and God becomes our father, and Jesus is our big brother. I mean, it's this really beautiful picture. And so family doesn't have the attitude of consumerism, it's contribution, right? How can I love? How can I serve? How can I invest? You know what's beautiful about gathering on a 4 o'clock on a Sunday? It's like I got to play outside all day with my kids. And I wasn't burdened by that. I love watching Grayson ride his bike, and I love watching Asher learn to walk, and we're just outside hanging out and playing. And family doesn't feel burdened by the contribution aspect. And it doesn't mean that it's not hard at times, but there's a different heart behind it. And here's what's sad. In most cases, I heard Francis Chan say this. He said that gangs look more like family than churches do. And I was like, dude. And I was like, all right, I could be in a gang probably. Like, I like the guys that get the tattoo of a gun on their hip. That was my favorite. I had to get that one day. But he said gangs can look more like family. Why? Why is gang life so attractive to mostly young men in urban cultures? Right? Because they've been abandoned by family. They have no one who loves and invests in them, no one to pour into them. And then gangs provide acknowledgement and family and peer relationships, and normally someone else that's older than them affirming them. And in a lot of ways, the way that a gang has a family dynamic is something to be admired, minus the drugs and the killing and stuff. But like outside of that, like I'm like, all right, like City Church gang got a little, blue bandana hanging out our back pocket. Like we could do that, right? So maybe not. That's a bad idea. So here's what Francis Chan said. I love this conversation. He says, can you imagine if people treated their gang like people treat church today? Hey, man, how was gang this week? Oh, man, it was so awesome. Actually, we showed up late. We were running behind, but, like, the part of the message that I did catch, man, it was so good. Or like, oh, man, you know what? I didn't make gang this week. I was too busy, a lot on my plate, but I'm going to gang next week. Don't you worry, right? And, like, if you replace that concept, right, it's so silly. So silly. Why? Because we understand that concept is about family. Family is not something that you attend. It's something that you're a part of. And that's what we're building is family. And it's a really beautiful thing. And so here's the challenge. The moment that you and I connect and stay connected, which is what last week's conversation was about, that we choose to connect and stay connected because that's where we're going to learn to love and to be loved. But the second that we do that, you know why it's hard? We're going to experience conflict. Right? Because none of us are perfect, right? You get around people long enough, you're going to hurt each other's feelings. And so if you hang out with me long enough, Tracy, I don't think we've done this yet, but I'm going to hurt your feelings, right? I'm going to do something stupid. I'm going to say something stupid. And man, our homes are a great example, right? The people closest to us, our friends and our family that really know us, right? They see the ugly sides of us. They see us when we have our meltdowns and say ugly things and do ugly things. Most of the fights happen in the car before you even get to church, right? Like that's a normal part of it. And then for the rest of the world, we kind of hide it. But I was thinking about it. Over 50% of marriages end in divorce today, and that stat is consistent in and outside of the church. Why? Why is that always happening? Because I think our definition of love is totally different from what Jesus is inviting us into. Because the love that Jesus has is a staying love, when our culture has taught us to build the concept of love around feelings and circumstances. And so here's the question. What is it going to take for our family to stay together? That's the question. This series is about our family values. And our internal values, here's the beauty of it. If we'll focus on these things and let the overflow of our relationship with God infect each other, what's going to happen is our internal values actually start to touch the world around us. So I don't know if this is true for you, but when I was growing up, my dad taught me a lot. Like we had some really heavy values in our family, and one of the things that was really, really big was integrity in our family. And it wasn't always used. The word wasn't there. It was just a manner of thinking and behavior. And my dad, through his actions, through his words, and through conflict, right, through correction, he taught me about integrity, so much so that I remember watching him, and I could see the rewards of living with integrity, right? I would watch and see like why it's valuable, but then also there's moments when I would mess up and I would get corrected in why I should do it a different way. So for example, when I was like a teenager, I had a little 22. We were out, had some land and a big hill, and he had a bunch of old cars sitting on top of a hill, and he said, hey, you guys can go hang out, shoot stuff, whatever, just don't shoot any of the cars up on top of the hill. I said, okay, Dad, no problem. And what did idiot teenager self do? I totally shot cars when I was up there, right? Why? Why? Because when you shoot a car, it leaves this really cool bullet hole looking thing, and so I shoot like just one car multiple times with this 22, leaves all these holes in the door, and then later my dad comes up and he sees it and he said, "You shoot that car?" I said, "No." Mm-mm. Sure did not. And of course he knew I was lying, right? It's like a super old rusty car and it's got fresh bullet holes in it, right? Totally apparent. And dude, he was mad. I mean, like, like he doesn't say anything, but I can tell like I could die any moment, right? It was that moment. And he didn't say anything. He actually walked away and let me totally melt in it. And my grandpa came to me and he said, you need to tell him the truth, right? And he didn't tell me that, he already knows, right? But let me have the benefit of the doubt. And I went to my dad, you know what? And this would have been one of those moments, he could have abandoned me. He could have yelled at me. He could have scolded. He could have done a lot of things. Instead, he loved me. He corrected me. He disciplined me. Right? There was consequences for my actions, but here's why. He told me, listen, the reason I told you not to shoot any cars on the hill is because the truck that you shot, I was selling next week. I'm like, oh, whoops, Dad, right? I just thought they all junky cars that sat up there. He's like, I was trading it next week. And I was like, wow, I'm an idiot. And I learned about integrity in a very real way. Here's the point. That lesson, my internal family values, affects everything I do now, right? Everything I learned in my home, it affects every relationship. That's why I don't want to lie to you. I have integrity in my relationships, in my business transactions, as a church. All of it's so important to me. Why? Because I learned the value of it inside. That's what we're doing here is the values that we're talking about, they're for us, they're internal family values, but they can't help but touch everything that we encounter in our city. It's why our neighbors are gonna see this all the time. And so here's what we're going to do. We're going to look at a letter from a guy named Paul to a church in the city of Philippi. Now, Paul was a really religious guy. He was actually so religious that he was actually killing Christians. And he actually became a Christian in the process of killing Christians, started following Jesus. So much, people didn't even trust him. Like, they wouldn't even let him around the church or anything because he was like, hey, I became a Christian. They're like, yeah, right. Ain't letting you hang out. And so finally he convinced them. He totally met Jesus, started following him. He became one of the number one church planters, wrote over a third of the New Testament that we read today. And so he's writing this letter we're about to read. And I want you to think of Paul in this season. He's actually in prison writing this letter. He planted multiple churches. And he's kind of like a dad at this point, right? So he's got all these churches, and he's kind of like the dad of all these churches, and he writes a letter to check in on his family. And he's been getting reports about what's going on. And so his major concern in this letter is that they're maintaining their friendship in the church, and that there's a lack of unity that he's heard about. Like they're not on the same page, right? They're fighting a little bit, which is natural. Here's what he says, verse 1 of Philippians chapter 2. He says, is there any encouragement from belonging to Christ? Is there any comfort from his love? Is there any fellowship? The word fellowship, all right, so it means participation in each other's lives. Right, the closer you live, then it's more than just I saw you on a Sunday. It's we live life together. He says, is there any fellowship together in the Spirit? Are your hearts tender and compassionate toward one another? Then make me truly happy by agreeing wholeheartedly with each other. So he's asking a question. What is there anything that you've taken away from following Jesus? Right, so these guys, this is a new church. They all started following Jesus, and it's kind of like a tongue-in-cheek. He's like, is there any encouragement that you receive from Jesus? Any comfort? Any tender love? Any fellowship of living life together and compassion? And the answer is yes, of course. Like, yeah, man, we received all of those things from Jesus. And so he's kind of doing this tongue-in-cheek, like, you know the answer to that question. And then he goes on and he says, well, then if that's true, then make me happy. I want you to think of Dad, like talking to his kids. Would you just get along? Right? Make me happy by agreeing wholeheartedly with each other, loving one another, and working together with one mind and purpose. Why does he have to write this? Because he knows that the longer that this church lives life together, they're going to be in conflict. Right? He's having to say that you got to be on the same page because you know the longer you're together, if your kids are in the room for an hour, they're going to fight, right? Like it's just going to happen. And so he's writing to them saying, listen, you can't have love without conflict. That's the first point. You can't have love without conflict. And Paul knows this as he writes it. And so here's the deal. If we're going to love each other, it's going to bring about conflict. It just does. That's what happens, right? If you've been married for any amount of time, you know that. If you have friendships, you probably fought. And so why is he saying all of this? Because he realizes that as they grow and live life together, they're going to be in this boat. And so here's what happens. You and I look at this, and people look at this, and when they get around church and they're moving from a consumer religious mindset to becoming family, they know this is true. You can't have love without conflict. And so the answer is, well, then I'm just not going to connect. I'm just not going to get close to anyone. I'm not going to do that, right? If I stay away, then I don't have to deal with conflict, which is a legitimate solution, right? The problem is that's not good for you, and it's not good for anybody else. Right? If we avoid conflict, what happens is you maintain your pride, you maintain all your crooked edges, you maintain all of the brokenness, and you have no one there to help you grow. Genuine love doesn't point fingers and make people angry. Rather, it's an investment that says, hey, I love you. I want to help you grow. And so there's a verse in Proverbs that says that two friends are like iron that sharpens iron, right? I want you to think like, swords that are clashing, or like, when you're like a blacksmith who's working on metal, right? Iron sharpens iron. I was thinking about it, like nothing about that is comfortable. Like two pieces of metal hitting is not great, but both of you get better as a result of it. And so here's the idea. I'm gonna avoid it because it happens. Or the other thing is I'm gonna give my fake version of me. If I know this is true in relationships, then I'm going to come and bring a different version of me so that people can't get to the real me. Like I don't want to be hurt. I know a lot of people who avoid deep relationships because they've been hurt. And it's understandable. Like, man, I don't want to let anybody in because I don't want to be hurt at that level anymore. And so I'm not going to be completely open. I'm not going to be completely transparent. I'm just going to kind of be around the scenes. Bob Goff he wrote this book called Love Does. It's so good. And he has this story. Dude, it's so funny. He walks by this really fancy painting shop, and he sees this painting that catches his eye, and like goes up to the glass, and he whispers in his own like voice. He's like, "You will be mine," right? Really creepy that he says it in the book like that, but he totally does. And so then, over a year, I don't know how expensive, he never says how expensive this painting was, but over a year, he saves up money. He's a lawyer. He's got some money, so I don't know how long and how much this was, but over a year, he saved up the money to buy this painting. And then he finally had the money, called the guy, hey, man, I'm coming to get that painting. Showed up, and the guy had 2 of that painting. He said, here you go. And he said, what's that? He said, well, this is the fake one that you hang on the wall. And this is the real one that you put somewhere safe so nothing happens to it, because it's an original classic piece only made one time by a really famous artist. And so you hang the fake one on the wall so it doesn't, if anything ever happens, it's safe, and the other one you protect. And Bob Goff was like, well, that's dumb. And he said, I threw the fake one in the closet and hung the real one on the wall, right? And so he said that in the process, he and his kids would have these epic rubber band wars. And like the really, 2-foot stretches, rubber band, lose an eyeball. And they would have a lot of those. And he said one morning, same spot, he would get up, sit at his table, drink a cup of coffee. He looked over and he said he almost fell out of his chair because the guy in the painting had taken a headshot from one of the rubber bands the night before. And so his priceless, one-of-a-kind, beautiful painting had a marred face on it because of a rubber band. And he said the kids denied it. He said it was actually probably my rubber band that did it anyway. But he said that I think that as he was looking at it, I still love that painting. There's nothing about it that I don't love anymore. And in fact, like it's still just as memorable, as valuable. And actually now it's got a memory attached to it that I didn't have before. I still rather have the original on the wall. And I think he goes on to say, listen, a lot of people that hang up their fake version of themselves and hide the other one in the closet. He says, but man, God made you a masterpiece to put on the wall and to be present and open. And you know what? It might mean that there's some times you can get hurt, but it's worth it because God made you to be able to be you openly and transparently. Like, man, that's a really beautiful picture of us not putting that fake version of ourselves out there. So I say all that to say, listen, don't take the easy way out and say, all right, well, if conflict's the result, I'm going to avoid it. Here's point number 2, or actually, let's go to verse 3. Verse 3 says this. He goes on and he says, don't be selfish. Don't try to impress others, but rather be humble. Thinking of others is better than yourself. Don't look out for your own interest, but also take an interest in others as well. Here's point number 2. You and I, we can't resolve conflict without humility. So you're going to have conflict if you engage in any kind of relationship that's loving. But what Paul's saying is, hey, he gives them instructions to be humble because you can't resolve conflict without humility. So what happens? Normally when people get in conflict, they do the fight or flight thing, right? So my personality is I fight, right? Like I'm aggressive and let's talk about it now, let's deal with it now. And Danielle's personality is flight, right? So I shut her down with my loudness, and neither of us ever get anywhere when both of us respond in our extremes. Paul's saying there's a middle ground, and it's humility. And I was thinking, it happened today. This is so awesome. Humility is not thinking less of myself, which I think sometimes we think, be humble, be a doormat, let people step all over you, and that's not what that word means. It's not thinking less of myself as much as it is thinking of myself less. You with me? It's thinking more of others, which he actually just says. He actually gives us the definition of humility. Hey, don't make it about you. If you would just think less of yourself in the moment, then you can actually win. So today, Danielle and I were having a silly argument. It came out of nowhere, and I realized if I would have just taken, I totally missed it, by the way. I'm like teaching on it, and I totally messed it up. And so I realized if I would have just shut up and quit trying to make my point, then we could have resolved it instantly. But rather, I let something else about me become the focal point of why I wanted to win the argument. And so Michelle and I, man, we have conflicts that our personalities that just conflict like naturally. We're both that fight personality, and so we have conflict often, and it's not normally a big deal, but most of the time it's my fault because I say or do something stupid. And so Michelle has two options when this happens, and Michelle's really good at it because she's been embracing this value. She has two options. She can either be mad at me, or she can let me know. So let me give you some really helpful lessons from the movie Frozen. Don't be like Elsa, right? What does she do in the very beginning? Conceal, don't feel, don't let it show. And then she's like, well, now they know, right? Like, so don't be like her, right? Because when we conceal it and don't feel, right, what happens? Ice-mageddon. That's what happens, right? But then at the end, right, she's like all walking and prancing on the side of a mountain. She's like, let it go, right? What happens? She found freedom. Don't do it that way, right? Don't let it blow up and then go be by yourself on a mountain somewhere. That's not helpful. I don't know where I was going with that. Don't do that. But here's what Michelle will do. In grace and truth, she'll come and say, I'm not attacking you, right? It's not, Drake, you're an idiot. Why'd you do, right? It's not an attack. She's really smart about it. Grace is giving something that you don't deserve, and truth is the truth, right? So it's not either or, it's both of them. And she won't ever say this, but she does it in a loving way, right? She won't say I love you, but she'll do it in a loving way. I'm not attacking you, I love you. And she'll say something like this. You might not have meant it, but here's how it came across. Right? So she'll come to me in humility, and I have a chance to respond in humility. And we can deal with that conflict. Now, for the record, like sometimes they're heated emotionally, right? So it's not easy. Easy to talk about in this circumstance, but like when your emotions are heightened, it's not easy at all. And so Danielle, same thing, man. Most of the time I say or do something stupid, and if she doesn't tell me, here's the deal. Here's why this is so important. If you don't tell me, I'm not going to be any better. One of the most painful things for me is when someone gets mad at me and they leave my life and they never told me what happened. They stop answering phone calls and text messages and just walk out. And I've seen it enough over 28 years that I'm like, man, like that's really not a great way to help relationships. Like we can resolve this. Now, for the record, resolving conflict doesn't mean we walk away best friends. Resolving conflict just means let's think win-win about this. It might be that we can shake hands and agree to disagree and move on. But we're able to resolve it and have a win-win rather than, I'll see you later, you hurt me, I'm out. And family does that, right? And so instead of getting a divorce, you can say, man, how can we grow together? That's what we're talking about. What does it take to stay together? Here's the other thing. Perry Noble said, man, don't do crap sandwiches, okay? No one likes a crap sandwich. So crap sandwich is when, and I don't know where we learned this, but we come to George, and I'm going to say something really nice about you, like, oh, man, I love the way that you were doing this. But, and then I'm going to try to tell you what you did wrong, and like, man, if you really work on that, but don't worry, man, you're really, really good. And so what I did is I gave you some critical information in between two compliments, right? What is that? That's a crap sandwich. That's what that is, right? No one likes a crap sandwich. You just give it to me straight. But here's the deal, man, from the top down, as a church as a whole and as an individual, I can't be better unless you're transparent and honest with me and let me know how I hurt you. And the same is true for you. And I love you enough to do that. Let me, Tracy, come here, and George, let me give you an example of humility real fast. Come here, George. All right, so you guys face Daniel and the camera and Michelle. All right, so you guys get right up against my shoulders right here. So when it comes to humility, push up against me, put some pressure on me right there, put some pressure on me. Good, good. All right, so imagine this is conflict, right? So conflict feels like this, right? You've been here where you like got pressure on you. You guys can put a little more pressure on me if you want. Yeah, right there. George's got, George's got leverage. So, right, this is what conflict feels like. And what Paul's saying is, hey, when you love, you're going to get into situations like this. And they're uncomfortable, right? So we try to run away from them. But he's saying the answer to conflict is humility. And so I can push back and forth and we can create more conflict. Or keep pushing. Or the answer to conflict and humility is this. Humility is, getting low, right? And you guys are supposed to hit each other, but you didn't do it. Yes, yes, right. And so, no, you're good. Take a seat, take a seat. Thank you guys very much. Give them a hand for helping. Good job. All right, so the answer is get low. The word humility literally means, it means to get low. And I want you to think about like fights as in like gunshots, right? If you're in the middle of a room and gunshots start going off, what do? Oh my God, right? You're getting low. And God says this. He says, if you will humble yourself, if you'll get low in the middle of conflict, he says, I'll be the one to lift you up. Right? Because if we raise our head too soon, try to do it in our own power, we're going to get hit by another bullet, right? And most of us, man, we're reloading with ammunition in our mouth, right? We're like, right, and get ready to throw some more bullets. He says, listen, when it comes to resolving conflict, if you'll just get low, right, then what does it do? It resolves it immediately. It's not about me. And again, I'm still dealing with it, but I don't have any ammo to throw back at you. So let me go to the last verse here. And again, this is learning how to be family. It's not easy. More is caught than taught. So this is something we have to practice at, right? I told you, I already messed it up today. I already messed it up before I got here. Would you talk about feeling like a hypocrite, right? I'm like, I'm going to go preach on humility, and I'm such a jerk. Verse 5, he says, Paul transitions, and he's talking to them. He says, you must have the same attitude that Jesus had. Though he was God, he didn't think of equality with God as something to cling to. Instead, he gave up his divine privileges, and he took the humble position of a slave and was born as a human being. And when he appeared in human form, he humbled himself in obedience to God and died a criminal's death on a cross. So what happens in humility and in conflict is sometimes we feel justified, right? And so then we want to fight. And for the record, humility is not saying that the other person is right and I'm wrong. Humility is just simply making it less about me because I value the relationship. And Paul's saying Jesus was humble, right? What did he do? He stepped out of heaven into humanity, and he set aside his divine attributes. He had every right, all God and all man simultaneously, but he steps out of heaven for the value of humanity, to be like us, to live the life that you and I can't live. None of us are perfect. Jesus lives a perfect life. Not to show off, not to point fingers, but so that life could be a substitute. And he dies the death that you and I deserve. And when he dies on the cross, the death that you and I deserve, his perfect life is surrendered, not because he was deserving of it, because he humbled himself. And then he died, and 3 days later he rose again like you and I can't, presenting us with the opportunity to have a relationship with God like we can't earn. Here's the deal. Last point is that you and I, we can't be humble without Jesus. We can't be humble without Jesus. Here's why. I love this. Paul goes full circle. We've been talking about it the whole series. The whole purpose of being a Jesus follower, the whole central idea is it's about relationships. And when it comes to our relationships, Jesus models for us and invites us into a relationship with God first that overflows into every other relationship that you and I get to touch. And being a Jesus follower is not living for Jesus. This is really important. And I love that he ends here rather than starts here. He comes back and says, listen, all of that only matters if we land in right relationship with God. Because being a Jesus follower is not about doing right things for Jesus. It's letting Jesus live that life in and through us. It's the byproduct. It's the overflow. It's not easy. It's continually difficult. But here's what happens. He reminds them of their capacity and their calling to each other, that it's rooted in a relationship with God. Here's what I mean. Paul's saying you can't forgive others outside of remembering that you've been forgiven. What's hard about forgiveness is most of the time they don't deserve it. So why don't we give it? Because they don't deserve it. But then if you're a Jesus follower, you remember, man, I received forgiveness and I didn't deserve it. So man, if God loved me like that, I can love others like that. Or, you know what? It's going to be really hard to be patient with your brothers and sisters, your other family members, without their perspective of how patient God is with you and I. Or it's really difficult to be graceful with others and bear the burden in their personalities and how difficult it is unless we remember the grace that we've received from God. It's really that simple and difficult at the same time. He says, man, you can't be humble until you remember that Jesus humbled himself for you. And so the challenge with love, I think, is that more is caught than taught, but you and I don't have the capacity to be humble outside of a relationship with God. The love that we have the opportunity to carry into our relationships with each other and the world around us is different because the God that we know is different. Jesus said, last week we looked at it, John 13, he said, the world will know that you're my disciples, my followers, by the love that you have for one another. And this is challenging, but you know what? I think that this love that we're talking about really can be truly remarkable. That when people look and say, man, is what they're talking about legit? We don't pretend to be perfect. I think humility is part of that. I don't have it all figured out, but I definitely have a desire to love you like Jesus loved me because of the relationship that I am receiving from him. Here's the light. Let me just tell you this. 1 John 4. One of Jesus' followers, he's writing, and he says, guys, listen, we love God because he first loved us. It's not something we earn or cultivate or manifest in ourselves. We simply respond to the amazing love of God. And out of that overflow, it should start to touch everything else. But here's what he says. He says, man, if you say that you love God and then you hate your brother, you're a liar. These are some hard words. He said, you're a liar. Because you can't say that you love God who you haven't seen and then say that you hate your brother who you have seen. Right? You could tell me you love me all day long, but if you hate my kids, I know the answer. I know the answer. God's saying the same thing. Listen, you don't have the capacity to love each other outside of me, but I'll give you the power to do it. But if you really love me, you're going to love what I love. You know what I love? My kids. Every human being you and I pass, man, there's a masterpiece version of them that God wants to hang on a wall, and he wants us to love all of them. So a couple of action steps as we end our time together. First thing is this. Listen, man, maybe you need to throw that fake painting of you away and hang the real one out there to see. You know, the best place to see that happen is in our city groups, right? It takes time. City groups have to meet. I read a stat that said it takes 12 weeks to start breaking down walls to simply relate together and to let that painting get shoved in the closet, right? And so maybe you need to throw that painting away. And maybe you're not in a group and you need to be. Or maybe you are and you just got to stay committed to that group and living life together. So we have groups that meet throughout the week. We have a new semester coming up. Some new ones will start. So maybe you even want to lead a group. Maybe you want to start a group with some other people. And we'd love for you to be able to start that. Why? Because more is caught than taught. And if we're going to practice loving one another and we're going to be consistently transparent and relationally invested, we have to do it in the environment of groups. The next thing, maybe for you, is this. It was for me today to get low, to be humble, and to deal with conflict. Maybe right now, as we're talking, you have some conflict in your mind that you have to deal with. You know that things haven't been right, and there's some tension somewhere. And I just want you to know I have a phone call this week that I have to make to be consistently transparent. I don't want to make it. I'm not excited about it, but I've got to do it because it's the loving thing to do. And I'm not going to be a hypocrite. I just want you to know how hard it is. And so maybe there's a relationship that you need to deal with. Again, doesn't mean walking away best friends. It means that we fought for a win-win the best that we could. You can't control other people, but you can control you. The beauty of this conversation is that the overflow of this value, we already talked about it, is going to start touching our neighbors and our friends and our coworkers. And so I can love my neighbors without agenda because I'm consistently transparent with you and them. And that's why we can serve Crestview Elementary and they can say, what do you guys want? Or they're looking for that angle from a religious organization. We can just say nothing and mean it, really mean it. And it might take some time for them to trust us. That's okay because we have the value of consistent transparency that we're not going to hide anything. That's why we can tell you what the finances of the City Church look like without even blinking an eye because it doesn't matter. There's nothing to hide. You know what? When we make a mistake, you're going to know about it. You're going to know about it. Most importantly, Paul ended on that. I want to end with it. Is that maybe you and I today, we need to prioritize some time with God. God is inviting us into a relationship with him. It's through faith in his son, Jesus. We have the opportunity not only to to be saved and to have an eternal destination of a relationship with God in a place called heaven, but we also have a relationship to enjoy right now. And I know it's true of me that I have the capacity to love in greater ways when I spend time with God on my own and develop that relationship. And just like any relationship, it takes work. I remember the first time I met Jesus, I started following him, I started trying to figure out how to pray and read, and I had people around me to help me. That's what city groups do too, is to give you the tools to help you. Guys, listen, we don't have time for fake. Life is too short. Our friends and relationships are way too valuable to not be consistently transparent. And our promise as a community, as we grow, is that this is a place where you're going to receive love, but it's going to be transparent. It's going to be full of grace and truth. Not going to pretend and hide an eye when you got spinach in your teeth. You know what I'm saying? We're going to love you enough to tell you the truth, but also just be there for you, to not point fingers. Here's the deal. If we don't embrace consistent transparency, then the baggage and the burdens of failed relationships are only going to keep growing. And we already have enough of them to last a lifetime, to be honest. I don't want any more. But if you and I will embrace consistent transparency, not only will we grow, but our family will grow. Let me pray with you. Will you bow your heads with me? As you bow your heads and close your eyes and take a moment to reflect on what God is doing, I want to invite you just to maybe respond to what God has put on your hearts. Maybe you're here and you know that you got to do something with that fake version of yourself and get the real one out there. Maybe it's what you're bringing to a city group. Maybe it's dealing with conflict. Or maybe you're here and you say, you know what, Drake, I need to start a relationship with Jesus. We talked about this idea of faith. And faith is not the same as hope. It's not hoping that something will happen. It's confidence that Jesus is who he said he is and that he can do what he said he would do in our lives. It's confidence in a real historical Jesus that lived and walked the earth, that really was crucified, that died on a cross, and that hundreds of eyewitnesses said rose from the grave. It's not just hope. It's a genuine confidence. And so maybe you're here and you say, you know what, man, I need to start a relationship with Jesus. I want you to know it's through faith in your own heart and mind. Maybe you're here and you say, man, I want that. I want you to know that God can hear you when you pray. In the silence of your heart and mind, you can say, Jesus, I believe in you. I believe you died for me. I believe you were God. I believe you rose again. I believe you want to save me and bring me into a relationship with God. And however you would say that, there's no special words or magic formula, but genuine faith in who Jesus was and what he did for you. And a turning of your life over to him and say, man, I want to follow you. I want to have a relationship with you. If you do that right now, I want you to know in confidence that you can have a relationship with God starting today. And it'll start to overflow into everything else that you and I touch. God, I'm so grateful for the time that we've had. I'm grateful for your love for us. And I'm grateful for an example of love that is simple and difficult, but to be honest, God, that we're so hungry for. So I pray that this internal value would be something we learn to practice and live out, but it would start to touch everything around us, and that we could be truly remarkable both in our lives, in our families, in our parents, in our neighbors, in our kids, and in Boulder. It's in Jesus' name we pray.